Are you silently battling the crushing weight of financial fear? Do the numbers in your bank account feel like they're judging you rather than just informing you? Well, if that's the case, you are not alone. And today's Financially Confident Christian, my friend Craig and I are going to go into great questions you've shared, and we're going to ask the tough question. When the numbers hurt, can faith truly heal our financial fears? So stick around, because if you've ever felt shame or panic or discouragement about your money, this episode is for you. And before we jump into today's show, I'm thrilled to share a quick preview of my brand new weekly show, Grit and Growth Business, which officially launched today. You didn't start your business to get rich overnight. You didn't expect it to be easy. But you also probably didn't expect it to feel this hard either. The long hours, the late nights staring at the numbers, the pressure to keep it all together while wondering if you're doing something wrong. Yeah, I've been there too. I'm Ralph Estep Jr., and after 30 years of running businesses, coaching entrepreneurs, and walking through fire with clients, I can tell you this. Most of the people you admire didn't skip the hard parts. They survived them. They grew them, and that's what this show is all about. Welcome to Grit and Growth Business, a podcast for small business owners who build it from scratch. No trust funds here, no startup hype. Just you, your vision, and the daily grind of keeping it alive. Every week we get real. We'll break down the stuff that no one talks about. How to pay yourself, how to price your work with confidence, how to grow without burning out, and how to build a business that actually supports your life, not just drains it. This isn't about chasing hacks or hype. It's about building on purpose, with strategy, with grit, and with a little help from someone who's done it the hard way. So if you're a small business owner who's tired of pretending everything's fine, if you're craving honest insight from someone who's been there where you are, then this show is for you. Visit gritandgrowthbusiness.com to learn more, get free resources, and sign up for our newsletter if you're ready to go deeper. This is Grit and Growth Business, strategies that grow businesses, and we're just getting started. Hey there, and welcome back to Financially Confident Christian. I'm Ralph, and it's great to be with you for a special episode. This is the show that helps you answer that question: how can I become a financially confident Christian? And over the past few days, we've kicked off our new series, Dealing with the Stress of Money Worries. We've covered some foundational, maybe even challenging topics designed to help you take those crucial first steps towards that financial peace rooted in your faith. And today we're going to discuss some powerful questions sent in by you listeners just like you, questions that really illustrate the difficult struggles we've been talking about this past week. These aren't just questions. They're windows into pain points, the breakthroughs, and the journey many of you are on. And I'm thrilled to have my good friend Craig joining me again today to add another layer of insight to our challenge as we tackle these important topics. Well, welcome, Craig. How are you doing today, my friend?
Doing all right. Can you tell it's summertime? I'm in a t-shirt, so.
Summertime is always good, man.
Yes, it is. I don't get paid in the summer, but I don't. It's nice to have the schedule. So.
All right. We're getting a comment that our audio is echoing. Let's try this. Is that better? Are we still echoing in? Because I'm still hearing an echo.
I'm not hearing it.
I'm hearing it on my end too, but I'm not sure where it's coming from.
I'm going to mute and put in some earbuds.
Okay, thank you, Craig. Not trying to make it difficult, but that could be the issue. Rebecca, thanks for sharing that with us. We definitely do not want the old echo chamber going on. So, well, let me go ahead and get started while Craig is getting set up there. And these questions aren't just about information. They're really about transformation. And they really reveal the true heart of the financial struggles that so many of us go. So, Craig, I'm eager as we go through these to get your insights on these as we go. So, question one, let me jump right to that. And this one comes to us from Paige. And it cuts right to the core of where many of us start. And this is what Paige wrote. She said, Ralph, thank you for talking about financial shame in your episode. Am I the only one losing sleep over money? She said, I feel so much shame about my debt and my past money mistakes. It makes it really hard to talk to anyone about it, even my spouse. How do I actually push past that shame and take the step to talk? Well, Paige, I want to thank you for your raw honesty there. This isn't just a question. It's really a cry for help that resonates with so many of us. That shame you feel is exactly the struggle we talked about in that initial episode. It's really a heavy burden, and it thrives in isolation. It whispers lies that you're alone and unworthy. But I want to start by telling you this, Paige. But remember the biblical principle from Galatians chapter 6, verse 2. I have a little dyslexia there, Craig. And it says this, it says, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. And I love this verse because it says God designed us for community, to support one another, especially when we're having difficulties. And see, shame tries to tell you that your struggles are unique and embarrassing, but here's the truth, and this is anchored in faith. This is the whole point of this show, is that you are loved and valued by God regardless of your financial situation. And just remember this, Paige, your worth is not tied to your net worth. There are other believers who have faced similar challenges and truly can offer grace, wisdom, and support. So, Craig, what are your thoughts on Paige's question here today?
Well, I think you raised some good points for her, but I always find shame to be a fairly pointless emotion unless it leads to action. It's kind of like guilt. It's past focused, and we can't change the past. So if you're feeling some shame, try to turn that into some sort of action that you can take to make the situation better. And I think you can actually transform that shame into a form of pride. So it's, if you just feel shame, it doesn't do anything but weigh on you. But if you can turn that shame into positive action, then at least it has some benefit.
I agree with you 100%, Craig. I think so many people get mired down in that whole shame loop, and it keeps you stuck where you are. And I thought about some other things, Paige, that I thought would be useful things to talk about. One of the things that I think you need to start with is acknowledge and confess, what you've done in the past, because I think that's the foundation. If you come to a point where you say, look, yes, I made mistakes. Listen, Craig, I speak for me, but I've made financial mistakes, and this is what I do for a living. And so Paige and other people who are watching or listening right now, start by acknowledging that. As a Christian finance show, acknowledge that to God. Say, God, listen, I'm not perfect at this. God's not asking you for perfection. That's the first thing. I think as human beings, we get stuck on this expectation that because God is perfect, we've got to be perfect too. But guess what? Here's a little truth bomb. We're never going to be perfect. And so I think if you start off with that foundation, and one of the things I talked about in the show, Craig, is that, and I think it helps to identify one safe person that you can go to. I call that your sanctuary. And listen, that might not be your spouse, and that's okay. But go find one safe person, because to try to bear this all on your own, it is really not easy. Craig, did you have some thoughts? You look like you had a thought there.
Yeah, it isn't easy to bear that alone. But I want to go take maybe a half a step back.
Sure.
Sometimes your financial situation is a result of things you've done or didn't do, but sometimes it's just bad luck. And so, I know sometimes people feel shame about circumstances that are beyond their control. So that also seems like it's pretty counterproductive to me. So just because you're not in a strong financial situation, that just may be the way the dice rolled for you. So don't feel like it's always your fault. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it isn't.
Yeah, I agree with you. And like I said, go find that safe person to talk about. So, and you could say to somebody something like, hey, I've been really stressed about finances lately, and I need to talk to someone about it. Because like you said, Craig, it might have been nothing that you did. Like you're just the unlucky winner of the lottery of bad fortune. It's funny. I have one client, he always says, well, Ralph, if something's going to happen, it's always the black cloud over my business. And it's the truth, because there have been times and time again when he's done nothing. It just happened. He would have an accident or somebody would get hurt. And, but I think what we're really alluding to is break that silence, take a brave step, because you don't need a grand solution. Sometimes you just need someone else to listen and then just reaffirm your identity in Christ. So keep reminding yourself that your identity is in Christ. It's not in your credit score. It's not in how much is in your bank account, and your value is secure with him. You're not going to lose that. That's independent of your financial standing. And here's the thing. I think shame aims to redefine you by your mistakes. And I think that's the problem, is that's exactly what shame does. But faith, if we're strong in our faith, it reminds you that what God says you are, who he says you are. So again, Paige, I just want to thank you for that question, because it takes immense courage to even ask it. But I think that asking that question is the first step to really breaking that shame and getting to a point of healing. Well, let's move on to our second question. And this one comes to us from Courtney. And Courtney writes this, and it speaks to a fundamental fear that many of us have, and that's the fear of truly looking at our situation. And this is what Courtney says. She says, I listen to how can I look at my bank account without panicking? And how do I get a clear picture of my money situation? She said, Ralph, I tried to look at my bank account, but I just froze up. The fear is overwhelming. How do I get past this panic to actually do that snapshot? Well, Courtney, I hear you loud and clear because I've been there too. I can remember times when and this is before, I want to really date myself now, Craig. This is before you could log into your bank account. And I remember the fear of getting that monthly statement, or was I going to get that call from the bank that my account was overdrawn, because they would give you a call and say, hey, guess what? We got a check here that we can't cover right now. And that fear is real, and it's a major hurdle. And that's really the struggle that I addressed in that show that I did. How can I look at my bank account without panicking? And honestly, it's the fear of the unknown. It's the fear of what the numbers might confirm, or it's that same feeling of being condemned. But I want you to remember this, Courtney, from 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7, it says, For God did not give us a spirit of timidity, but a spirit of power, of love, and of self-discipline. And see, here's the thing, Courtney. You've got access to God's power to face this. And this isn't just about willpower. It's about spiritual warfare against anxiety. Craig, what are your thoughts on Courtney's situation here?
I'm going to sound very cranky old manish.
Here we go.
But my first thought was, it didn't take long. What are we, 8 minutes in?
8 minutes in.
Not bad, not bad.
It's the Craig curmudgeon moment. No, I'm just being funny.
There we go. So my first thought was cowgirl up. Yeah. I mean, really, burying your head in the sand doesn't do any good. Fate. So I'll tell you a quick story. Have you ever seen the agility trials that dogs do?
Oh, sure, absolutely.
So our little border collie Maggie took agility lessons, and she was a natural. She was awesome at everything, but the evil teeter-totter.
Oh, that teeter-totter gets you every time.
Every time. And so she'd be running towards the teeter-totter, and she'd kind of stop and get hesitant. And I'd look down at her and I'd say, face your fears, Maggie, face your fears. And so that became a meme in our little class. But I think you have to do that, face your fears, because what you find out when you face your fears, often those fears are just built up in your own head. They're not real danger. She was not going to get hurt on the teeter-totter. I mean, it's still evil, but she wasn't going to get hurt on it. And looking at your finances, yeah, it's unpleasant, but rip the Band-Aid off, face your fears, and you'll find out that, okay, this isn't that bad, or you at least have taken the first step at doing something about it. Now, I have a less cranky answer too, if you want to hear that.
This is a double answer. I like it.
This is a double answer. So one of the things that can be really helpful is to try to take what we could call a disinterested third-party view. So don't make it your bank account. Pretend, and this is a mental trick, pretend like it's somebody else's spending log or bank account or, stack of bills or whatever. And take that higher level view where it's not about you. This is some other person that's in this situation. And I think it's a little mental trick, but it can be very useful to just step back and depersonalize it a little bit.
Yeah, that's the benefit I have in my accounting practice. I get to do that on a daily basis, Craig, because in a lot of ways, when I'm looking at people's finances, it's not mine. So I have that third party, ability. Now, the other thing I was going to bring up, though, is I remember when I took the Dale Carnegie courses, and one of the things that they strived in there was, here's what we do. We assume the worst possible outcome, right? Just make that assumption. And I think, Courtney, that's what I'm going to tell you here. I think this is a good way to handle this too, Craig. And I hope you agree with me, is assume the worst possible scenario and then work the darndest to improve upon that. But you just have to face that fear. Like, what's the worst possible scenario that you log into your bank account and it's a 0 or it's a negative? Okay, fine. It is what it is. What do you do to change that? Now, let's talk about how you can change
Right.
that. And one of the things I think you can do is you don't have to do everything at once. Start what I call microscopically small, just one number. Just say, I'm going to face the fear of this. I'm going to look at, what's going on. The other thing I'm going to tell you is, we talk about Christian faith on here. Put on your armor, your spiritual armor. Pray for courage before you look, if it takes that. And listen, this isn't a quick fix, but it's inviting God into your moments of weakness. Breathe, look, and thank God and say, this is a cycle. I can get past this. And you've got to just go gradually, brick by brick to build that confidence. Like your dog, your dog's not going to jump onto that teeter-totter the first time that you look down and you're the dog whisperer and say the teeter-totter's not bad. Our German Shepherd, she freaks out when she sees a box come into the house. So anytime Amazon arrives, her name is Piper. And she just sees this box come in and she freezes. But so listen to this one, Craig. So I walk her on the farm most mornings, and we're out for a morning walk today. And we've got a bunch of deer here on the farm, big deer. And they're what they call swamp deer or marsh deer. So a little bit bigger and darker. Well, every time she sees one, man, she goes tearing off at them, right? And I'm thinking, well, if I could just retrain her. So let me finish my story. So this morning, and we got fences around the whole property, right? Because what happens is this marsh, if you guys have ever been around marsh, it is the nastiest, like black, like tar water around. Well, she doesn't understand that. She just jumps right in. So this morning, I'm out there walking her. We get to a turn, and she sees a couple of deer on the other side of the fence, and I'm thinking, oh, here we go. So I continue my walk. I'm doing my everything. Get to the end. She's gone. I'm like, where is this dog? Well, she had hopped the fence, cleared the fence. She's standing there covered from head to foot in black stuff. And I said, now I'm going to put you in a box. No, I'm just being funny. But see, no fear when it comes to the deer jumping the fence, jumping into the marsh. And we don't have alligators up here in Delaware, but no fear. But man, if you bring a box in the house from Amazon, she loses it. So you just have to face, I'm sorry, go ahead, Craig.
No, well, I was going to say there's actually a really cool lesson there.
Right.
So the thing that might hurt her, she goes after a big buck, they could turn and do some damage.
Oh, absolutely.
The box isn't going to hurt her. So she fears what she shouldn't fear.
Right.
And so, and we're all like that. We've all got our thing that just kind of freaks us out a little bit. But don't, you just have to sometimes just face your fear.
Yeah, and
it'll be all right.
And I think the other side of that is focus on facts. Because so many times we focus on feelings. Oh, I feel this way. Feelings are great. You can feel whatever you want to feel, but there are facts about things. The fact is, here's a simple example. If your account is overdrawn, it didn't magically happen. It's just like if I get to the end of the day and my blood sugar's high, guess why? Well, because one of two reasons, either I ate too much sweets or I didn't exercise enough, right? Well, your bank account's no different than that. Either you took more out than you put in. But focus on the facts, because you can get stuck in that quagmire of feelings. It's really easy to do that. So, Courtney, I just want to thank you for sending that in. Your courage in sharing this is really inspiring to all of us. Well, let's move on.
And sorry if I got cranky.
No, you didn't get cranky at all. It's the summer in Louisiana that you're feeling, I think, Craig.
There you go. That's right.
Well, let's move on to our next question. This one comes to us from Jessica. And Jessica hits a common frustration once people get past that initial fear and look at their numbers. So this is Jessica. She's gotten past that fear, Craig, and now she's actually looking at her numbers. And she said, Ralph, I made a snapshot, and now I'm trying to create a budget like you talked about, and can a budget really reduce my stress? But it feels so confusing. Where do I even start putting numbers into categories, and what if it doesn't look right? That's a great question, Jessica. You're asking the exact question that can stop people dead in their tracks once they decide to budget, because they hear the word budget and they're like, oh, I'm not good with the money. And it's funny. I recorded a short the other day, and it's funny because I said, a lot of people say that to me, Ralph, I'm not good with money. Okay, well, if you aren't good at something, you have two choices. Either you can continue to not be good at it, or you can try to figure out a way to improve your skills, right? And it can be incredibly confusing initially. I get it. It's like learning a new language or building a complex puzzle with no instructions. And that feeling of overwhelmed by the process and the fear you'll do it wrong is common. But remember, budgeting is simple. It's simply telling your money, you go here, you go there. It's an act of intentional stewardship. So I want to tie the Bible into this, Craig, because I found this verse in the book of Proverbs, chapter 16, verse 9. It reminds us this. In their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. And see, your budget is your plan, but you still have to trust God to help you guide your steps as you work that plan. And remember, a budget isn't some rigid control. I think I used it on the show before. It's not like Moses coming down with the 10 commandments on stone tablets. It's about trying to bring order into what may feel like chaos and start to tell your resources where they need to go. Craig, what are your thoughts on this one?
Well, my first thought was a lot of people don't pay much attention to the 10 Commandments either. So,
Oh, that's fair.
yeah. So I'm going to turn professory on you now.
Let's do it,
Since I've
man.
been Cranky Craig, now I'm going to do Professor Craig.
I like it.
So plans in general can help reduce uncertainty. And uncertainty is often a cause of anxiety. So there's a direct relationship between having a plan and reducing anxiety. And then there's a pretty well-established psychological theory called self-determination theory. This goes way back. It's really well-established. And it says that our well-being is largely made up of three things: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So do we have freedom? Do we feel like we have the ability to do what we need to be doing, competence, and then are we connected to others? Well, having a budget ticks two of those boxes. If you can establish a budget, it's actually an exercise of autonomy. I'm deciding where this dollar goes to work, and I'm deciding where this dollar goes to work. And it also gives you you're building towards even greater freedom as you get your financial house in order. But it also gives you a sense of control, which increases your competence. So you mentioned, I don't know all this stuff. If you're not good at something, you got to learn it. Well, if you're not good at something and you start doing something about it, that's going to bump up your competence feelings. And you're going to be better off. You're going to feel better about yourself in general. And so that idea of taking control, that exercise of autonomy, and then that increased feeling of competence is just going to pay huge dividends for your well-being beyond the financial dividends.
Yeah, and while you're talking about your professor hat, I mean, you see this with your students all the time, I'm sure, right? You come in, a new student comes in, they don't have any concept of what you're going to be teaching them, right, Craig? And they've got to accept the fact that now, correct me if I'm wrong, but you generally work with doctoral students and higher level students, correct?
Often, right?
Yeah. So, but even that level, right? They still don't have all the competency to do it. But what you're basically saying, and I concur with you 100%, is that each little piece that they add to it helps to build that momentum, and then it kind of reinforces itself. And we can apply that same thing to a budget. Start with a simple snapshot. Here's what's coming in the door. Here's what's going out. You don't have to have a degree in rocket science to figure out what that looks like. What is your paycheck? How much is your direct deposit? Guess what? You just started a budget. Here's your income. Here's what comes in the door. Then go get your bank account, go get your credit card, and list out what goes out the door. Again, this isn't complicated. But see, I don't think that's really what's going on here, Craig. I don't think it's the fear of being able to do it. I think you alluded to the bigger fear, and that is restriction. And we've kind of talked about this. So how do you get past that feeling? Because I think a lot of people make excuses. Well, I'm never going to budget because I don't know how to do it. It's complicated. I'm not an accountant. I've never been good with numbers. But really what we're saying is they don't want to live under restriction, which here's the problem with that. The fact that they're not living under restriction is causing them stress. It's causing them heartache. It's causing them all kinds of physical, all kinds of emotional and mental issues. So, Craig, how do we get past that point?
I think I would recast restriction as discipline. So restriction is you cannot do this. Discipline is I'm choosing to do this or not do this. I'm using my exercise and self-control to take actions that are going to make things better for me and my family.
Right.
And so I think if we take away that idea of restrictions and say that this is self-discipline. I mean, I know we've talked about weight loss a lot on here, but that's kind of how it is with weight loss.
Right.
I'm on a restrictive diet. No, you're on a disciplined diet.
Right.
And that means it's coming. There's a big thing here, big piece of this. Discipline comes from within. That kind of self-discipline, it's right there in the name, self-discipline. It comes from within. Restrictions come from outside. And so I think that's another step in this idea of autonomy and taking control is I'm choosing to be disciplined in these matters. I think that reframing makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I agree with you. And one of the things I noted here to talk about with this question was, prioritize the non-negotiables. There are things that you have to put in your budget. You got to pay for. Listen, if you want to have a place to live, if you want to have a roof over your head, these are the pillars of your financial house. Now, you can still allocate some discretionary spending because you got to do that. If you think you're going to live under this rigid set, now you may need to do it for a while, but at some point you've got to open the doors and say, look, I need to have some discretionary spending. I think what's the old adage? No fun makes Jill I don't remember the whole thing, but makes somebody boring. I can't remember the term. I lost my mind.
All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy.
Exactly. So one of the cool things you mentioned there, and I like that, it's discipline. But the discipline allows, and that's the thing that people don't get, is like start with a little discipline at the front end, and you open the door up to this huge amount of ability to allocate discretionary spending. See, if you start to control what you can control and you start to live under that discipline, then you're going to open up the door to more discretionary spending, which is going to give you more ability down the road. It's just true.
Well, and there's a huge additional benefit here. So Aristotle teaches that we are what we repeatedly do. And if you can start to build discipline in one area of your life, in this case, financial, then you're going to be more disciplined in other areas of your life. And then eventually you will be the kind of person who just is disciplined. And all discipline is the ability to control your actions. That's all it is. And so you're going to be a person that has control over what you do and what you do not do. But it's not just financial. You'll find out, oh, okay, I can do this in this area of my life, and then I can do it in this area of my life, and then I can do it in this other area of my life. And your life will just be much richer.
I agree with you. And one of the things that I can encourage you to do is do what I call zero-based budgeting, which basically means that every single dollar has a job. If you think about it in those terms, the job for this dollar is to pay my mortgage. The job for this dollar is to pay our insurance. The job for this dollar, you get the idea. And remember, one of the things I like what you said is it's intentionality. It's not deprivation. And again, I want to go back to something I said at the beginning. It's a practice. It's not perfection. You're going to go through iterations of this. I remember I had a class in I'll tell you a funny story, Craig. I had this class in my undergraduate work, University of Delaware. I did accounting work. And I had this class I had to take called finite math, right? And this class was the most, I don't know how I ever got through it because honestly, the best way I can explain is this guy was like the mad professor. He would sit up and he had like 15 of these boards that would go up and down and he would do these tableaus, right? And he would go on this like 30-minute tableau. He would get to the end and he'd sit down and go, I messed that one up again. And so I'm saying here's the professor, right? I don't know what the right term is, the tenured professor. He made mistakes, right? In front of his 400, there'd be 400 people in this class. Most of us were half asleep. I'll never forget, Craig, funny little aside. First day of class, he says, here's the thing you all need to understand. He says, no one will pass any of my tests. And I'm thinking, wow, like that is a gutsy thing. He says, but with the curve, some of you will get an A. And I was like, well, okay, great. So I take the first exam, Craig. I think I got like a 40. And I'm like, and I'm one of these overachievers. And I'm like, it said something like 40 equals a B. I'm like, cool, I got a B out of 40. And I'm thinking, boy, I beat the curve on that one. But my whole point of that was, here's a guy that understands it, but he was practicing. He was going through these tableaus, and maybe he made a mistake somewhere. I passed the class, but I still couldn't tell you what finite math was all about, man. It was a mess. But then you got to understand, getting back to the question, your budget is a draft. It's not a decree. And you have to understand that. It's a draft. It's a starting point. It's practice. So, Craig, any other thoughts before we move on to our next question?
No, just stick with it. It'll get easier.
So, Jessica, yeah, I agree. Jessica, thank you for sharing. Your question reminds us that even with good intentions, and I think Jessica has good intentions here, the practical steps can be daunting. Well, let's move on to our fourth question. And this one comes to us from David. And it brings us a crucial point about sustainability in his journey. And he says this, he says, I started tracking my spending like you said, and why should I track my spending? Isn't it depressing? I thought that was a good name for a show. And then I reviewed it and my spending data is ready. Now what do I do? See, I tied them together, Craig. And he said, honestly, seeing how much I spent on things I didn't even realize was pretty discouraging. Now I just feel bad about my spending. How do I keep tracking and reviewing without feeling so discouraged or guilty? And David, here's the thing. You're doing the right things because that feeling is exactly the struggle that we anticipated when we talked about doing that tracking. That's the whole point for doing it. It can feel incredibly discouraging when the data reveals habits you didn't realize you had, but that's why we're doing it. Or maybe when you compare your actual spending to your budget, maybe you took that step and you did the budget and then you see this big gap. You know, it's kind of like holding a mirror and seeing something you weren't ready for. I see that every time I look in the mirror. But remember, tracking and reviewing aren't about judgment or shame. They're about being aware. They're about awareness. And those tools that I talked about are for insight and understanding. So we talked about in my spending data is ready. What do I do with it? Think of it as gathering intelligence for good stewardship. And I brought this biblical reference in here. It comes from the book of Luke, chapter 16, verse 10. It reminds us this. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. And see, tracking is being faithful in observing where your money is going, even the little amounts. Craig, what are your thoughts here?
Well, it goes back to that idea of looking backwards rather than forwards. So what he's basically saying is he looks back on the spending that's happened in the past and he has these negative emotions about it. And regret is kind of like shame, but a little bit different. So that's the way I'm hearing it, is he's regretting his past actions. Regret can be a wasteful emotion. In fact, it is a wasteful emotion unless it leads to positive action.
That's the key, Craig. So, you just nailed it. That's the key. Yep. Regret in itself is useless.
That's right. And so if regret is a trigger for you to say, that didn't feel so great, looking back on how I wasted that money, I want to figure out ways to keep me from doing that in the future. And, we've talked about a bunch of these, leaving something in your shopping cart for 24 hours, asking whether or not you're really going to get any satisfaction out of this thing you're going to buy. We've talked about a bunch of those kinds of little mental tricks. But I think that's the big thing. Take that regret and turn it into positive action. And then that little bit of negative emotion isn't wasted. Plus, you're kind of very subtly replacing it with a positive emotion because we feel a little bit of, pride gets a bad rap. But we feel a little bit of pride in taking that positive step. And so we really kind of flip the emotional coin over from the negative emotion of regret to the positive emotion of reasonable pride.
Yeah, and I think it's okay to have pride in doing things the right way. And the thing I was going to say, David, is acknowledge what you've done. Acknowledge the situation, then pivot. That's the whole point. Acknowledge it, pivot, and collect the data, not damnation. Like so many people look at that and they go, well, I'm damned. I can't get anywhere. This is what I see. But see the data points for improvement, not as character flaws. Like Craig just said, if you see this as just character flaws, you're never going to move forward. And remember, the big takeaway is the why. That's the thing you need to focus on right now. Why are you doing this? Why? Because you have, David, your intention is you want to do things better. If you understand it, yes, I'm going to find stuff that I wasn't expecting. That's the whole point. If you weren't tracking it, guess what? You would have never figured this out. You'd have your head buried in the sand. So remember your why and then focus on small adjustments. So many people say, I've had so many people come in, Craig, and they'll say, Ralph, I did that for 30 days and man, I'm doing everything wrong. And I said, okay, good. Now we can work with that. There's something we can do with that. But the next thing I say to him kind of surprises him. I was like, all right, let's pick one thing. For the next week, focus on one thing. We've talked about these things, Craig. Pack your lunch. Put that pause on before you buy stuff. But tiny levers, these little things that we can change have a huge impact. And I think it's so easy to get stuck in the data. And so, oh, well, the budget said I didn't do this and I overspent in this area, Ralph, and we ordered out takeout every night. But then they don't think about, yeah, but then I just found out my wife was sick or the kids were sick or, life happens. And I think
Yeah.
we get so hung up on this rigid set of like expectations that we don't acknowledge the fact that we are flawed people. If you don't hear anything else I say today, acknowledge the fact that we are all flawed people. But see, that's the beauty of being human, is in our flaws. That's where humanity starts. And I think I got a little deep there, but it's true. That's where so focus on small things. And the other side of this, and so many people don't get this, celebrate small wins.
Hmm.
Celebrate small things. And even if it's, oh, I didn't buy something, that's a win. Go back and look at your cart. I'll get to you. I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you,
No,
but
go ahead. Go
that's
ahead.
a win. And if you go back and look at that cart that you paused for 48 hours, go look at your Amazon. I'm picking on Amazon, but go look at your Amazon cart and look at all the wins. Those are the things you didn't buy. But Craig, you had a thought.
Well, there's a thing called a virtuous cycle where the one good act makes you feel good, and that leads to another good act, which makes you feel good, and so on and so forth. And I think what people will find is if they get over that initial little bit of guilt or regret or whatever emotion we want to call it, and they say, oh, you know what? I could cut back here. And then they do that for a week. That feels good. And it almost turns into this kind of a game where let me find something else I can cut back on. Let me find something else I can cut back on. And it really does have this self-reinforcing cycle that can be really quite positive.
Oh, it's
So
very
just, you
positive.
got to get started. You got to
I'm
get started.
I'm going through that right now with my weight loss, Craig. Like, it's kind of fun. Like, I'm at the point now where I had to go buy belts. I haven't bought belts in years. And I'm buying clothes. And my wife is like, yeah, you got to buy some clothes. So I was on Facebook, right? And I wear like old man jeans, I guess is the best way to say it, with the pleats and all that, because I've been a big guy my entire life. Well, so I said, well, these things are so big now. Like I'm having to like tuck the sides of the pants in on the sides and the belts. And so I said, well, I'm going to go buy some jeans, right? So I went online, found some jeans. That was a mistake. First of all, don't shop for clothes online if you don't know really what your size is. So I said, well, I'm wearing this size right now and it's too big. I'll order one size down. Well, the coolest thing, Craig, the jeans came last night. My dog didn't freak out because it didn't come in a bag. They came in a bag instead of a box. So Piper was fine. So after dinner, I'm standing there at the kitchen counter and I said, oh, cool, my jeans are here. And I've been making fun. I said to my wife, I ordered skinny jeans. And she looks over at me. She goes, Ralph, you're not skinny. I said, no, God didn't make me skinny. Well, anyway, so I pull these jeans out and I'm all excited. I open them up and I said, I'm going to go try these on. I went to try them on, Craig, and they're huge on me. And I'm thinking, oh, this is awesome. I'm liking this.
Yep.
Because,
that's a return you want to do.
oh,
Yep.
yeah, man. I was like, and I said to her, are you going to the store? She goes, yeah. I said, oh, great. I want you to return these and I'm going to order 2 sizes smaller. And she's like, do you really think I said, yeah, that's what I want to do. But what I learned from that, and it's the same thing with your finances, don't stop. Don't stop.
Yep.
Learn the lessons and go on, because listen, it's that pain of awareness. It's just that first step. But once you take that step, you get to that point of healing and you get to that point of freedom. And listen to us. Craig and I have both been here. We're speaking from experience. You will get to a point of freedom. It's not easy at first. You're doing something that's hard. Managing your money is hard. I joke and say it's not rocket science, but it's hard. It's hard to get to restrain yourself. It's hard to restrict yourself. It's hard to be, disciplined. Those things are hard. So don't beat yourself up, but keep moving forward. So David, I just want to thank you. That was a great question. It gave Craig and I a good opportunity to really talk about it. And so keep pressing forward because you're gaining valuable knowledge. Well, Craig, let's move on to question number 5. And this one comes to us from Gracie. And Gracie's question touches on the mountain idea of you're trying to climb about debt. So it says this, it says, I've acknowledged my money stress and looked at my snapshot, but my debt is so huge, it feels impossible to even start. How do I tackle this mountain without getting completely crushed? And when I got this question, Craig, I started thinking, I can see Gracie standing at this big mountain. And we get to the prayer. I've got a cool slide here for the mountain, but I get it. it's like, and you're looking at this thing, you've listed out your debts. So you've taken the hard work. You've said, okay, because one of the things I said in the show, Craig, is I want you to list all your debts, be honest. Here's what I owe. Here's the amount. Here's what the interest rate is. Here's the monthly payment. But once you do that, then you're going to stand back now and you go, wow, there's a mountain here. I get it. It's a heavy burden to carry. It's not easy. And it's easy to look at that mountain of debt and feel like, you know what? I can't do it. It's insurmountable. I'll never get over it. But I wanted to go to scripture. And Jesus said this in the book of Matthew, chapter 17, verse 20. It says this, truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. And so I really thought that that was a good way to start answering your question, Gracie, because our faith isn't just for spiritual matters. A lot of people think faith, if I'm sick or something's going on, it's not just for spiritual matters. It applies to every area of our lives, including our finances. God gives us strength for all things. The book of Philippians, chapter 4, verse 13 reminds us, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So start with that, Gracie. Yes, it's a mountain. Yes, it's going to be hard. Yes, you've gotten yourself into a position where you've got a mountain to climb. But you can get past this. There is a way to get past the mountain. Craig, what are you thinking here?
Well, there's an old saying in the running community. I think I've used this before. How do you run a marathon? One step at a time.
Amen.
It's 26.2 miles of one step after another. And that's what you need to focus on is look, I'm going to take one step. And there's an interesting thing about that one step. You're closer to your goal than you were before you took that step. So you just need to think about it. Go back to that small wins. What's one thing I can do? I'm going to do that thing. And then I'm going to do the next thing. And then I'm going to do the next thing. And that's how you solve these sorts of problems. And something that you've said before is focus on your progress, not perfection. And so when you have that win, have a little mental celebration. Every time you reduce that debt a little bit more, or you retire a debt, or you whatever it is, have a little mental celebration of it, and it'll be a reinforcement, positive reinforcement to keep that sort of behavior going. But look, most of us who have been in debt, we didn't get that way overnight. It took a while, and it's going to take a while to unwind it. But stop digging. I'm going to mix metaphors here. So we had the mountain going high. You've got dug yourself into debt. First thing to do is stop digging, and then start climbing out of it. But one step at a time.
You're right. And Gracie, your beginning step might be not adding any more debt. That's a step. That is a step. That's a foothold. And then pray for wisdom, pray for strategy, create a mini plan for just one debt. Maybe you say, look, Ralph, I got this one credit card I owe $1,000 on. I can focus on that. I can take $10 a week and send it to the credit card company to pay that down. Now, I'm hoping the interest rate isn't enough to eat that up, but I'm being positive here. But the fact that you're not digging, the fact that you're not adding to that, the fact that you're not in the dark, you know what you've got. That's huge. You've put together, even if it's a mini plan of, look, I've got an extra $100 a month. Here's my debt extinguishment fund. That's huge. And celebrate that progress, the small victories, because those small victories, one of the things they talk about with debt reduction, and I talked about this on the show, the debt avalanche, the debt snowball, both of those metaphors are one thing, and that is a step and a step and a step. You got to focus on the small victories, because you're right. If you think that you're going to, Craig said it very eloquently, said, you didn't get into this position overnight. You're not going to get out of it overnight. And so many people have that mentality, like they're going to go play the lottery, and then next thing you know, they're not going to have any debts. And guess what? That doesn't usually happen. So you're going to have to invest. You took a lot of time to invest in creating the debt. You're going to have to take as much time investing to extinguish it. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. And think about what Jesus said. If you have the faith of a mustard seed. Now, and I looked this up. A mustard seed is minuscule. And Jesus used that intentionally, I think. Because what he was saying is faith can move mountains. I know that's a cliche thing to say. But just have that little bit of faith, because I don't know about you, Craig, but I have had experiences in my life when I just put faith I've tested faith, basically a better way to say it. And man, it just happened. It doesn't mean I didn't have to put work into it. And I don't want people to get disillusioned if they think that, oh, Ralph said today on the show that I list all my debts and I pray about it and they go magically away. Nope, Ralph didn't say that. But what Ralph did say is, like Craig said, if you're going to run that, was it 26.2 or whatever that is for a marathon? I remember I ran a 5K, and like fat man when running a 5K, and it started with the first step. Yeah. And yeah, it took me 45 minutes to run a 5K, but guess what? I finished. Dude, it could have taken me 3 hours. I didn't care because I was walking, I was struggling along, but I was going to finish. And you've got to think about it the same way. Craig, what are your thoughts? Anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would also add that faith without action usually is not very effective. And so, faith is a funny thing. It's a very funny thing. But I think take action. Don't rely just on, you've heard the joke about I think I told it on here, about the guy who fell off the cliff and God sent him a rope and so, God will give you the tools. But you need to do your part as well.
You got to take action. So, Gracie, that's what Craig and I say. Thank you for your vulnerability, Gracie, but taking that first step on the mountain is often the hardest. Well, Craig, let's get to our final question for today. And this one comes to us from Daniel. And Daniel perfectly encapsulates a challenge many of us face after that initial burst of motivation. This is what he said. He says, Ralph, I get so motivated after listening to the show, but then life happens, and I fall off the budgeting tracking wagon. How do I stay consistent and not feel like a failure every time I miss a step? Well, Daniel, here's my answer for that. Your question hits home for so many of us, including me. Listen, I fall off the wagon. I miss steps. That initial motivation is powerful, but that's not the key to the whole thing. The key to the whole thing is maintaining that consistency when life throws curveballs, and it will. I play men's church league softball. And there's a few guys that pitch that throw curveballs. Now, if you're an old guy like me, if you wait long enough, you can whack a curveball a long way, but you got to have patience. And it's not easy. And it is absolutely easy to feel like a failure when you stumble. I get it. Been there, done that. But remember, the Christian life, much like our financial journey, is about perseverance and grace. And I love what Philippians chapter 3, verse 14 says. I press on towards the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. And James chapter 1, verses 2 and 4 remind us that perseverance produces character. And one of the things we've talked about a lot on the show today, it's not about being perfect. It's about getting back up, because you are going to stumble. You are going to make mistakes and you're going to fail. If you don't hear, again, I've said this a couple times today, hear me on this. It's not about being perfect. It's about getting back up. Craig, what do you think?
Yeah, when you fall off a horse, you get back on. If you want to get anywhere. So get back on the horse, get back on the wagon. It happens. Forgive yourself. Give yourself a little self-grace. I think it's a huge part of it. The other thing that I would highly encourage Daniel to do when he does, fall off the wagon, is to do a little bit of analysis about why. Did he let down his guard? Did he ignore his budget? Did he, was he trying to do some retail therapy? What was it? Did he make the mistake of going to Harbor Freight on a Saturday instead of coming straight home? What was it that caused that slip? And then try not to do that again. And I think that's a big part of it.
So you're talking about Harbor Freight, and my vision comes to mind. Like, I didn't realize when I first started going to Harbor Freight that those 5-gallon buckets are not intended to be shopping carts. Because I had this mentality whenever I went to Harbor Freight, and if anybody's never been there, they sell Harbor Freight red buckets. It's a 5-gallon bucket. And for me, it's always, okay, your goal today, if you choose to accept it, is to fill this bucket by the time you leave the store. Obviously, not always the best thing to do. But Craig, you nailed it. Self-compassion, not self-condemnation. And the bigger one, review why you fell off. Identify your triggers. That's the key. Once you figure out what triggers you, then do less of those things.
Right.
And find an accountability partner, but get back on the wagon immediately. Don't wait. One of the things I think, Craig, a lot of people do is they'll say, starting Monday, I'm going to do it. I've done this on my diet so many times. It's Tuesday and I've fallen off. I've eaten something. Well, it's Tuesday afternoon. Well, Monday's coming. Yeah, but then the problem is I just did crazy stuff for 6 days straight.
Right.
The key is to get back on it right away. And if you make a mistake, you bought something, first of all, ask yourself, can you take it back? Can you take back that impulse purchase? It might not be comfortable, but maybe you got to do that. Maybe you got to take it back. I remember we were shopping one time, my wife and I, she'll probably be upset I told this story, but I'm going to tell it anyway. My wife she really wanted one of those really fancy purses. And I'm not even going to tell you what it cost, but we went to the store. She really wanted this purse. And I said, well, go buy for yourself. You work hard, that sort of thing. She bought this purse, Craig, and we're walking around the mall. And the whole time she's thinking, do I really need this purse? And before we left the mall, she had returned that purse.
Good for her.
And so, yeah. And like I said, we had the money to pay for it. It wasn't like we were not going to be able to eat that day. But see, that's the thing you can do. So now if she had just said, you know what, I bought the purse, I'm just going to take it home. And, no. Change the dynamic right then. Because consistency is built on continuous recommitment, not unbroken perfection.
Right.
And that's really the key to it is, and don't wait till the next interval, my next paycheck I'm going to save, or my next this or my next that, because first of all, you might not get that next opportunity. And secondarily, you're breaking the momentum. So if you can change the momentum today, and I know it's tough. I get it. I've been there, done that. I didn't stay fat forever because I didn't make those decisions. I made those decisions to make bad decisions. But I remember one time, it's not my first time I lost weight. I remember I was in college.
That was very meta, Ralph.
It was very meta.
The decisions, yeah, very meta.
Very, I like it. Well, I remember I was in college, and a friend of mine, we were out doing something, and I used to love to stop at the convenience store and get those little cherry pies, right? That was like my little go-to thing. And he said to me, and I used to buy these packs that had 2 cherry pies and little square pies. And as a guy cared about me, and he says, man, I know you're trying, he says, but I want you to do something. I'm like, okay. He says, you want to get those pies, don't you? I said, yep. He says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to eat one, and I want you to run the other one over with your car. And I said, well, that's an interesting thought. So I went in, I got my pie, I got that little fix of pie, but then I did, I put the other one under my tire and I ran it over. And it might seem silly, but I was drawing a line in the sand. And yeah, I didn't eat both of the pies. I only ate one. Well, that's improvement.
Yep.
That's committing to that. Now, I haven't eaten one of those pies again after that night. So but that was my line in the sand. So again, it might sound like a silly analogy, but start with what you can control. Do it now. Don't wait till the next cycle, because you're going to find that you're not going to do it if you keep on putting it off and putting it off. Craig, what do you think?
You're exactly right. We're great at rationalizing actions and inactions. And so, that I'll go back to the idea of self-discipline. Just practice a little self-discipline. And every time you do, it'll get a little bit easier the next time and the next time and the next time.
Yeah, that's right. And you may have to do it midstream, like I did with the pie. I said, you know what? I got one pie in my mouth and the other one's going under the tire, which seems silly, but mentally, I remembered that.
Hey, whatever works.
Yeah, whatever works. Well, let's pray together. How about we do that? Let's pray together as we wrap up this powerful discussion. Father God, thank you for the opportunity to reflect on these profound questions and, Lord, the steps that we've taken this week. And we confess that facing our financial reality, the stress, the numbers, the habits, they truly can bring challenges and sometimes deep discouragement. And Lord, we just thank you for your grace to face these things without shame, knowing that you see us, that you love us, and that you are with us always. Grant us continued courage to look honestly at our finances. And Lord, give us wisdom to use tools like snapshots and budgets and tracking for your glory. And help us to learn from our spending patterns and to trust in your guidance every step of the way. Lord, and I just ask that you would bless the listeners who sent in questions and bless everyone who is diligently working towards financial confidence. And we ask this in confidence in Jesus' name. Amen. Wow, Craig, these listener questions really brought to life the journey we're on, from facing stress and isolation to getting a clear picture and starting with a budget and tracking debt and saving for consistency. And at the end of the day, these are really foundational steps on the journey to becoming what I've renamed the show a financially confident Christian. So I just want to say thank you for your questions and thank you. We were able to dig in deeper and address the heart of these financial struggles. And if you're having questions like this, we continue this series. You join us live every week. I do a daily show every day. You can send in your questions to our website. That's at financiallyconfidentchristian.com. And I do have a little giveaway for everybody. And right now, if you want a free copy of my book, you can get a copy of my book by going to financiallyconfidentchristian.com/master. It's just 47 pages, but it'll help you get started on that journey to really improve your finances. And I think you'll really find it worthy. And you can get that absolutely free by going to financiallyconfidentchristian.com/master. So, Craig, I just want to thank you for joining me. I really do appreciate it. We missed you last week, but we're happy to have you back this week.
All right. Good to see everybody.
And let's all go out there and be what we called ourselves to be, financially confident Christians. I encourage you to stay financially savvy. God bless you, and you have a great day today.